Welcome to the TTiepod. Now, 2026, here again, and we have been out the studio for a little while. We're back. Why not? Why not come back in the studio to get people to come in and have a conversation with us on the sofas? And as you know, at TTiepod, we bring in people in to have a discussion on various topics. It's not just on one topic, business or culture or filming or art, whatever. We're looking at different aspects, not just for Angola, but Africa and beyond. Now, I'm your host, KD, as usual. And as you know, at TTiepod, we do not introduce our guests. We get them to introduce themselves, let us into their world, and give us a bit more information about what makes them, I don't know if I can use the word tick anymore, but what gets them moving on a daily basis. And now we're going to go over to our guest. So, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Who are you and what are you doing here?
So, my name is Kenneth Grant. I am from Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Background is in energy and public policy, and it's the confluence of those factors that have brought me to Angola. It's a little bit odd because I didn't grow up in Texas. I don't really have any energy background in my family per se, except that my father owned a gas station at one point in my life.
Okay.
I was in public policy school and transitioned to a consulting firm. The consulting firm had a large energy practice, and this is back in the mid-1980s. And I just became passionate about the energy market, the policies around it, how we use it, how we consume it, the costs, the benefits. And so my career has really been following the transitions, all of the transitions in the energy market.
Okay.
So I started in oil market was just sort of going through its financialization. NYMEX was arising. That was changing how people think about how one values crude oil. I mean, for the first time, the world could look on a screen and see what is the value of the crude oil. Like today, where people wake up and say, oh, it's 100 barrels a day. When I started, you couldn't do that. You would have to call one of the companies and look on their website and what are they buying or selling. So it changed quite a bit. So from there, the natural gas market, and the writ large, the broad deregulation of the gas market. And then, of course, we sort of moved into climate accounting and renewable energy. Carbon is always out in the background. So how do we, so I don't do carbon accounting per se, but all the policies are becoming, how do we reduce emissions?
Okay.
Right? So how do we remove some emissions? So others are out there saying, if we do this kind of plan or this kind of action, it will reduce greenhouse gases, whether it's methane or carbon or any, by X amount.
Okay.
Right. So that you say we want to hit net zero or we want to be some goal. How do we do that given the technology that's at play? How do we write the rules that bring the renewables into play, that allow reduction of emissions in a cost-effective way that maintains the reliability of the system?
Okay.
Right. And that's the one kicker particularly in the energy market. You can store oil and gas. We're getting better at it, but you can't store electrons. Right.
Sure.
And as a policy, we generally say we don't want the power to shut off. So we have to build redundancy in the system.
Okay.
Market doesn't like redundancy. The market doesn't pay for redundancy. It pays for efficiency.
Yeah.
So how do you compensate for that redundancy? Bringing in these low-cost solar, say just solar, for example.
Okay.
That is a challenge when it can't provide, it's starting to, but it can't provide capacity the way, say, a thermal power can.
Okay.
Right? So my career has basically sort of been along this, and this is sort of where I am now, and this is what brought me to Angola. It was
You've been there from the beginning.
from
the beginning of this whole shift within the market.
Yeah, I didn't see the decline of the Seven Sisters, but shortly thereafter is when I entered the picture.
Okay, so from then and now, progressively moved on to where we are today, when it's all about, everywhere you go, it's all about renewables, right?
Right.
And again, yes, you're from states where it's still about oil more than renewables, but there's a market going on. Now, coming to Angola and Africa, what is going on?
So so as I told you, carbon is sort of out there in greenhouse gas emissions, right? It's always in the milieu now. In any energy conversation, you have this.
That's true.
So I'm just going to tell you a quick story of serendipitous.
Go on.
I said, I have to go back and I have to just really look at what the politics of COP are. What are people arguing about today? Because I'm thinking about this over here in terms of the policies at the micro level, but what's going on at the macro level?
Yeah.
And so I actually went back to my alma mater, took a class.
Okay. After how many years?
After 40 years, with a professor that's still there, still world-renowned. And I happened to, in one of the breakout sessions, happened to meet a gentleman who was Angolan.
Okay.
Class ends, I go home, I get an email saying, I enjoyed our conversation from the gentleman, I enjoyed our conversations. Would you be willing to hop on a video call and continue the conversation? So we started striking up a conversation around, particularly around biofuels. The project that he was embarking on concerned biofuels, and as you know, or if your audience doesn't know, the particularly European refiners, European biofuel producers, European fossil fuel companies coming in to start finding feed crops to manufacture biofuels to satisfy the European mandates, RED II, what is I think is now RED III, right? So they're showing up. He is a farm. He signed this agreement. And he just asked my expertise. And so we started talking about the project, started talking about the economics of the project, started looking at the contract. And at some point, I just said, I can't really do any more from here. I really we're at the point where we've talked it through and you've sent me pictures, but I need to come to Angola. Right. Ben Scenes, he sent me pictures and pieces, but I need to be on ground and just to understand the nuance and the context and how this is actually working. So I came over, and so we together have been looking at the impact of European certification policies for renewable markets, particularly using Angola as a case study.
Okay. And just to say, so the audience knows, so this gentleman is actually in audience. So anything we say that is amiss, I'm sure you're going to hear some coughing from one side of the room. So let's go back to that. So now you've come to Angola. There's something you're saying that's really important to me. We're talking about European policies for Angola. Anytime we talk about business in Angola, art, whatever that's coming from outside, it's all about how do you contextualize it to the reality of the land here. Is there any way we can go into that conversation?
So that's the nub to me. That is the place where you end up. Is the local context and European regulations and versus local context. I want to say this because I'll criticize the certification standards in some level.
Okay.
I want to just acknowledge, look, it is a challenge, right? There is a broad consensus that we need to reduce greenhouse gases. There's a broad consensus that we are going to need different kinds of fuels and different technologies to do this. And when it comes to say road fuels, at least for the transition until we can really electrify big trucks and so on and so forth, we're going to need to make what is referred to as sustainable biofuels. And that means you need to grow feedstocks. Okay, if you're going to grow feedstocks, you want to make sure you don't do things like cut down forests to create agricultural land. Forests are carbon sinks, and so they're pulling CO2 out of the environment, and you want to farm in such a way it doesn't take the CO2 that's embedded in the ground and release to the atmosphere, because it can not only mitigate the benefits of this biofuel, it can actually negate the impacts, and we could actually be worse off using biofuels.
So we could be better off.
Worse
off. We could be worse if we shift completely to biofuels.
If you could do it in such a way that you would completely offset any of the gains of burning a biofuel relative to a fossil fuel.
Okay.
So you could just do it really, let's just say poorly. I'm not a chemist, but as the economist and looking at this, you can do it in such a way that you would actually produce more
CO2 than
on the whole than otherwise.
Okay.
So I am just completely, I'm sympathetic to the rules, and I understand where everybody wants to go. And yet I would tell you the way I summarize this is the European rules are written with this idea that there is someplace in Europe, a very large tract of land that is farmable land that has been farmed, now sits vacant and can be used for producing biofuels.
I'll be looking forward to seeing where that is.
Exactly. And that land doesn't exist, right?
It doesn't exist.
It has very high value in Europe. It's going to be put to its highest, essentially it's going to be put to its highest and best use.
That's true.
Right? Whether it's for farming or whether it's for
whatever it is,
housing or whatever. Okay. So in the regulations, they have this premium on surplus or unused lands that were previously farmed. That's what they want. If you can find surplus or unused lands that were previously farmed that are not being farmed, that gets you a long way for being certified.
So now we're talking. Okay.
So I should back up and say, for the biofuel to be sold into Europe and to count against the mandate, it has to be certified that it was produced in a sustainable manner. So it traces the fuel right back through the supply chain.
Okay.
So the fuel is in Europe and they want to know, was it produced sustainably throughout the process, right back to the farm?
All the way up. Okay.
All the way up. And in the farm, what's sustainable? And there's very specific criteria that you have to go through. The regulations would say, because we understand this potential for offsetting if they don't farm well, what they really want is a piece of land that has been sitting there fallow, that's available to be farmed, but it's not currently being farmed. It's surplus.
Okay, surplus.
In some, this is the word I use, it's surplus in some fashion. Now, as an economist, it's a little hard to wrap my head around the concept of land that's surplus.
Yeah.
Because land has value and land is being used in some way, shape, or form. And so the European producers have this very strong incentive to come in and find the surplus land. The challenge is then, Angola, look, lots of millions of hectares that were previously farmed that are not being farmed. The regulations are completely agnostic and quiet on the context and why that is happening.
Okay.
And there it is. So you come in and say, okay, so there's a first incentive, this surplus land.
Tick.
Now you go through the certification process. And we were involved with one of the certification processes. There are multiple, but we used one. And there are 6 broad criteria.
Okay.
There are about 100 sub-criteria.
Within the 6?
Within the 6.
Wow.
90% of which need to be met immediately, from water, land rights, agricultural processes, fertilizer storage, land rights, community relations. It just goes on. It goes on and on and on. And you sit there and go, why are we talking about water? We're dependent on the rain, right? I mean, we don't have irrigation. So it's not like we have this whole section on water that needs to be accounted for. When in Melange, without an irrigation system, it's really just whether it rains or
not, yeah.
Right? So there's this cost imposed in meeting certification. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
okay. So you run this farm, and I say, okay, you have this compliance system.
Yeah.
Compliance system is a significant cost. Okay. Who covers that additional cost?
Oh. Okay.
So and I back up for the others. If you think about farming at its most level, and I'm not a farmer, but at its most level, we all understand. You have certain fixed costs associated with equipment. You have variable costs, seeds and fertilizer and so forth, right? And get it out, harvesting, processing, and then you have a commodity price that you receive your output. So the price you receive versus the cost that you make. You have a very thin margin, right? That agriculture is typically a small margin business, and on comes a significant compliance cost. I want to get to the Angolan farming context in a second, but there's a significant compliance cost.
Okay.
The regulations assume, I should be familiar with this as an economist because we assume a lot as economists.
Okay.
Assumes this financial premium for certified product. So it says basically if you're corn, or let's say sunflower, sunflower certified EU, you get a higher price than if your sunflower seed is not certified by the EU.
Okay, all right, makes sense.
But it doesn't exist. There's a market for sunflower seeds.
Yes.
Right? The market can't tell whether it's certified or not. It doesn't get a special.
It doesn't get anything. Okay.
Right? There's nothing special about a certified, about an organically grown sunflower seed, except that, you know, I personally know it's better for the environment, ostensibly. So the farmer is just saying, well, there's just one price, and all we've done is put additional cost on it.
That's true.
And that makes it prohibitive for a lot of Angolan farms.
Wow.
So during the course of this exercise, we were working with a professional agronomist. It was very helpful in thinking through really getting in on the farming economics, sort of looking at the regulations, of the EU regulations and how they get translated. And we were sort of coming together and say, okay, I'm bringing really looking hard at the regulations, and he's pulling up the farm. And I don't mean to dismiss his knowledge of the regulations. He's quite knowledgeable, but we had different assignments. And he said, you know, his professional opinion was just to cover the compliance costs. Forget about the startup costs of bringing fallow land back into production and what you have to do, clearing the land and whatever the terms are to bring a land back in. Just the compliance costs, you would need a farm of approximately 600 hectares.
600?
600 hectares. And that's not, my understanding is not the typical family farm.
No.
In Angola.
Exactly.
In Europe, one of those costs would be covered through farm subsidies and other farm policy.
Exactly.
You support government policies supporting agriculture.
Exactly.
Which again,
doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
No. If it does, audience, if it does exist, I don't know, but
I mean, my understanding is that, and I'm not I'm not an expert on Angolan agricultural policy, but I can say that doesn't exist. And I understand there's lots of policies in play to increase food production and alleviate food shortages. But as far as the certification goes, so you've got something that really looks like, as I keep saying, that the ideal is some European land in Europe that is otherwise embedded in the set of assumptions and policies of Europe that don't fit emerging markets.
Yeah.
And so part of what I've been thinking about, and my colleagues and I wrote this paper, is to say, you know, what I would like to see happen is countries like Angola either A, going to the table to the international certification bodies and saying, this doesn't work for us, and let us, amend your rules. So, because we understand what's going on the ground. We understand who's doing it certified. We understand the land rights. We understand the water rights. We understand the inputs they have available and the infrastructures. We can tell you who's doing it in a sustainable manner. Or, for me, better yet, would be countries like Angola to basically write their own certifications. And so there's a lot that have to go into that. But basically, Angola would say, someone from Angolan government would certify this is produced in a sustainable fashion, and that would then be accepted wherever. Okay. That you don't have to go to the EU and bring in their auditors down here. We have the mechanisms here, and then just issue the paperwork and say, here, we can.
I think taking it from that point of view, so I think with Angola over the years, anyone can correct me on this, even our audience, if I'm wrong. With Angola, the way I see Angola after being here for a couple of years in and out is the reliance on, most of the time, every policy. I've had opportunity to work within, I'll say, land-related issues. Most of the time, policies are always based on what is outside. You bring it in and you try and adjust it. So hearing you say that, okay, maybe it's the case that Angola needs to relook at things the other way around, create their policies, and then use that to certify, in this case, crops for biofuel. How would the Europeans and the Americans, or let's just say the West, how would they accept that?
Okay, I'm not naive. and I'm going to go off into a tangent here, okay?
Okay.
But I will show the relevance, and I understand there's the complexity is much more than the example I'm going to give you.
All right.
In another part of my life, I've worked with indigenous peoples in America.
Right.
And just for the audience who may not be aware, I will not do this justice, so I'm going to apologize to all indigenous scholars out there, including some of my closest friends. But the policy of America was basically to take indigenous people off their lands, put them on a small plot of land, and tell them, sit there and we'll feed you, we'll school you, we'll educate you. You don't need to do anything, and then take the resources of the Native American peoples. In the 60s, there was an awakening of reasserting sovereignty. And so what they were doing is reclaiming their authorities and saying, as a Native American nation, we're going to start writing our own rules. And you have to accept them. Now, there's a big tussle legally, lots of like, where does one authority begin and another authority end?
Exactly.
But it was a challenge. I mean, a lot of the federal government did not want to hear this. And I would expect, I mean, I'd be shocked if European or US governments also objected to this. Or there was some pushback in any event as to how this would work. And it would have to be exercised effectively on the part of any country that's doing this, would have to demonstrate, there's transparency and the system actually works in liquidity. So yes, I think there would be, my experience is there'd be pushback. My experience has also been, if you don't do it and you're relying on other people's rules, then it's just second best outcomes. The first best outcome is for the people who are impacted by the rules to write the rules and make the rules fit the context. So we can agree on what the goal is, then write the rules that for this context best allow that to happen. That makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. It does make sense. I think it's, what I hear is, if we don't deal with it now, what does the future hold? Right?
Well, the interesting part is, what we find is, I look at it and say, it's perverse in that it actually undercuts the main objective, which is to increase sustainable fuels, because what you're doing is you're taking a lot of farmland that could be used to raise biofuels and taking it offline because they, putting it off limits because the land can't afford the certification process. And be fair to the biofuel producers, it's a cost for them as well. And so it's sort of like, someone out there is imposing a cost, and you and I are looking at each other trying to figure out, who's going to pay for this? Is it going to come out of your pocket or my pocket? I would prefer it come out of your pocket. You would prefer it come out of my pocket.
Exactly.
Whichever it is, the margins are small, and it could destroy the economics of the project, which we all recognize there's a potential win-win here, right? That we want this to happen. And so the producers know this as well. The biofuel producers know this as well. This is not just one side. I think the regulations are well meant, but there's a time, we've now moved to the first phase. And I think we're at the point where we can sit back and look at them and rethink and amend and adjust as to how we're doing this to achieve the outcomes. Because ultimately, what's happening is biofuels are not getting produced to the capacity they could be produced. And people who could produce biofuels and benefit from the additional revenue streams are not. Right? So we don't really have, it's a sort of, it's cutting itself off at the knees in some sense. And it doesn't mean to, but that is an implication in effect.
All right. So we've looked at, talking about biofuels and that. And I know when we look at Africa right now, I know there's a lot of conversation out there with a certain friend of mine that's all about drilling. Biofuels, what impact does it have on drilling for fossil? How do you balance that especially when you come to Angola, come to Africa, and there's this discussion of, okay, listen, before others drilled for us, but now we want to drill for ourselves. We have the capacity to drill for ourselves in Africa, so why can't we drill? But then Africa has been pushed more towards, you guys invest in biofuels. Like, yeah, but we benefit more from fossil. How do you balance that up?
How do I balance it up from what? what perspective?
In perspective of, we have biofuels.
Yep.
Are we focusing too much on biofuels right now, or should we be focusing as much on biofuels when we still have reserves?
So I'm not the climate scientist, right?
Right.
This is bring to the economics. There's a carbon budget,
Yes.
right? And so everybody understands we have to move forward to reduce greenhouse gases because there's only so much.
That is always going to be there. Yeah.
It's going to go on. And so, but there's also, I think, fossil fuels aren't going away anytime soon, right? And the fossil fuels are a very competitive market. The production of fuel is very competitive. There's a transparent price. And so look, Saudi Arabia is the low-cost producer.
Yeah.
Right? And so after you move from Saudi Arabia, everybody else is then saying, okay, in this supply, if the long-range price outside of today's political environment is about $60 a barrel, let's assume for $60 a barrel, every producing basin, every producer is then looking underneath that and saying, okay, what's my margin?
Yes.
Right? And so Angola is competing against Ecuador, Guinea is competing against Brazil, is competing against the Gulf of Mexico, is competing against the state of Pennsylvania and Texas with shale oil, right? So yes, it's going to diminish the future demand for oil, all else equal, right? If you bring in a substitute and the government mandates you have to use the substitute relative to fossil fuel, by definition, some demand for oil goes away.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean all demand goes away. And so it's going to be there. And so now oil companies have basically another constraint to face, which is on the long-term horizon. If the European Union says 30% biofuels by 2030, then we're going to ramp up to X amount. What is their demand going to decline, and how do they think about that? And there's going to be growth in other regions where there's going to be, and so it's a competitive factor in how you drill for oil. It's not whether about you drill for oil, but another fact that you have to consider as to where you're going to drill for oil.
You said something again. I'm going to come back again on this. Initially, when we were talking, you said about, how do we contextualize European policies into Africa when it comes to biofuels, and especially in terms of certification. You just said something else now in terms of, the European companies have been given, they'll probably get mandates, you need to increase biofuels by 30%.
They will get mandates. The mandates are there.
Yeah, exactly. They're there. Again, it's the European market now controlling down here and saying, do you know what? We up there have to get 30%. So you down here have to now help match up that 30%, which then has an impact on, guys, what are we doing here? Who are we? I don't want to use the word answering to, right? Because again, it's contextualize it. You look at the West, it's everybody's moving on to electric vehicles, the whole push.
Careful, I'm from America.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to come back now. There, except for America. Now there's a push of going back, right? No one names any presidents out here, but it's the whole push of electric. No, let's move forward. But that is going on. There's a push. There's a massive push. Get the batteries, get that, do that. Everywhere you go, you have solar panels everywhere. Okay. Our reality here is a bit different. The market's still there for fossil fuels. You've already spoken about, balancing that act. And we've spoken about the companies. And it's interesting because all the companies now, at the end of each name, they've got energies. Because just to make sure that they're fitting that mandate with just their name, saying, we're focusing on energies. Angola definitely, you listen to the Ministry of Environment, listen to the Ministry of Energy, as well as, it's time to diversify. America has diversified. Gas. We're talking the other day in the cafe, and we're talking about gas. I was saying, I was at Qatar LNG 2026, and we were talking about, that shift to gas. Angola spent so many years flaring. Now they've understood that actually, do you know what? We can make money from gas as well. So now we're shifting, we're drilling for oil, but also transforming gas. How does how do we manage that with biofuels? Again, now I'm coming back to this and hammering on that. But you got fossil, gas, bio, renewables.
Yeah.
How do you balance that from an economist point of view?
So from an economist's point of view, I would say, okay, so what's the policy? Like, what is the societal goal? And the reason we're partly talking about Europe is because Europe has been out in front with the EU saying, our goal is this. We're going to have X amount of our on-road transportation fuel coming from biofuels.
Okay.
And so that's the policy. So now all companies have to take that into account.
Okay.
And then begin to compete on that basis, knowing that biofuels is coming in, and there's been a policy choice to subsidize, in some sense, biofuels.
Yeah.
It's just a mandate saying someone's going to have to pay the cost.
Mm-hmm.
The mandate only comes into effect because people know biofuels aren't as effective, they aren't as efficient, and so all else equal, I'd rather just use my internal combustion engine, right, with diesel. So to say, oh, okay, this carries this public bad, it emits greenhouse gases. So how do we do that? So Europe has chosen a mandate, right? And so now, as an economist, I look at it and say, okay, so there's a mandate, and the companies now have to begin to compete under that policy. And if I were to step back and say, you keep asking me about, oh, how do you balance this? But I look at this and say, it's really about clear policy. I mean, I think the challenge has been policy confusion, and there's no place, I think, better than that than the United States in policy confusion. And what is the goal? You know, what are we asking? And it's really because greenhouse gases it is the tragedy of the commons. It's a public problem, right? I can produce them in America, but Angola is impacted.
Yeah.
You can produce them in Angola, and Ethiopia is impacted, right?
Exactly.
So it's a collective problem that is really difficult to solve, a massive, difficult problem to solve. And so what you need is a set of clear policies around these that, the way I look at it as an economist, a set of clear policy, public policy has to lead.
Okay.
Energy companies cannot lead the transition. Capital markets cannot lead the transition.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Public policy needs to lead the transition, which the capital markets and the companies will then respond to and adjust to.
Okay. Okay.
If you just in a really simplified world, as I say to any energy economist, I had a conversation with a young person who's coming up and would be energy economist, and I said, they say, what do I do? I said, well, okay, first thing you do is you write your paper on why the world needs a carbon tax, and then you stick it in the drawer and you forget about it because it's been written 100 times and we all agree with it, but it's just a box you have to check. Like, yep, we need a carbon tax.
Okay.
But as an energy economist, I said, if I had one wish, it would take, okay, let's put a tax on carbon. If we could magically agree, and so there's a price, we're going to internalize this public bad of the carbon, and then all forms of energy then compete on that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
I mean, it's a wish list. It's a pie in the sky. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, it is. Because when we then talk about policies, right, and who helps shape the policies? You have government then that will get advice from who?
Yeah.
From the companies. They will get advice from who? The stakeholders, in order to put the policies in place already. So the policy is already skewed.
I didn't say it was going to be easy. Come on, man. I didn't say it was going to be easy.
In a perfect world, right? In a perfect world.
You're absolutely right. This is a challenge. All the participants and all the stakeholders are endogenous, as you say, endogenous to the actual policy making. There isn't, some divine philosopher, queen out there, social planner who's laying down the rules for all of us.
Yeah.
We're all participating in this process. The oil companies are participating in the process. Environmental groups are participating in the process. I mean, so we're all engaging in the process. And so, that is the messiness of policy. That's where as Bismarck would say, that's the sausage gets made, right? So I acknowledge, I don't want to lead anyone to say it's easy, but it is in that sense, it is still true. It is the rules have to be set. and it is the governments that have to lead, and the people have to lead and decide what the rules are going to be.
Yeah.
And then companies. But I personally get frustrated with capital markets can change the world, or companies can change the world. They operate in their own best interest, and they should. That's the nature of the capitalist system, right? You work on their own self-interest. And so if they see more money producing fossil fuel, they will make fossil fuel.
Yeah.
That's what they should do. And there's nothing that's immoral, or there's certainly nothing illegal about it. That's what they should do. So if we want to change that behavior, we need to change the incentives around that behavior. And that is really the tussle. Europe, as I said, we talk about Europe a lot because they're the furthest along with RED II, and now with the carbon border adjustment mechanism that's coming into play. We're going to start counting for carbon in the imports that they bring in, and that's going to feed back to the exporting country, right? If you bring in carbon that has a lot of carbon in it, it's going to get taxed really high.
That's true.
And I'm really fascinated to see the implications of that. I kind of wondering if I'm naively optimistic, because everybody else I run into is skeptical of having any effect. And I personally think it could be a profound shift if the steel is showing up and the Europeans saying, okay, it's going to cost an extra amount because you have this much carbon in it. And I will just a little snippet. Inside baseball, for your audience, Lindsey Graham is a powerful U.S. senator from South Carolina. And when Europe was talking about the carbon border adjustment, Lindsey Graham had issued a statement, and I don't want to quote him because it's a paraphrase because it's a couple of years ago, but he essentially said, wait a minute, why would we allow Europe to collect that tax? Why wouldn't we impose the tax here and collect it for the U.S. government?
Exactly.
And I thought that's he articulated what I was thinking.
Okay.
And that's why I think it could be profound. But that's, again, you set the rule and say, okay, there's a tax when you export carbon. Now everybody in the United States has to compete on that rule.
So technically, we could do it by country. We could do it by region, and everybody has their own policies that external players have to play to.
Yeah, and this is far afield for me, but the course I took with the Kennedy School professor, they've been thinking about different models.
Okay.
About how do you achieve this? And so now there's this model floating, like it's the equivalent of a G20, but for the carbon emitting countries. Like, do you have to be a large carbon emitting country? There's 7 of them. Get those 7 in a room. Instead of trying to negotiate 300 or whatever number of countries are in the world.
Focus on these.
Get the big consumers, big polluters in a room and say, can you guys agree on a rule which would then affect 80% of all carbon emissions or whatever it is, right? So it sort of begins to try and you try to wrap your head around this problem of it's a common, public goods problem. And so can you shrink it? We don't get all the emissions, but if we get enough of the big guys, the assumption is everybody else can then follow suit.
Okay. All right. No, thanks for that, Kenny.
Again, I'm not saying it's going to work.
No, I believe I've been schooled. I'm sure the audience has also been schooled, and you watching as well has been schooled. I know our time is running by quickly. I've already been informed of our time. So just 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes, just quickly, just to round up. Do you have any last advice for governments, for policymakers, on the best way to deal with this change that you are optimistically envisioning? So last 5 minutes.
My parting words are this. Much of this debate for me has been binary. One side's right, one side's wrong. We do all renewables and there's no fossil fuels, or renewables are too expensive and they don't work and we need fossil fuels.
Yeah.
It has always been my contention is it's going to take everything. The policies have to be contextualized to the location. So a country can say, we're each going to reduce our emissions by X% over the next 15 years. One country may have tremendous capacity for solar. Another country may have tremendous capacity for geothermal. Yeah. Right? And the goal is to reduce the emissions. That is, you have to ask yourself, what what policies, what fuels, what approaches will have a meaningful contribution in that location. And it's going to look different across the globe. And to try to standardize or harmonize and say hydrogen will solve all the problem, or wind will solve all the problem, or solar, it won't. They'll all play an important role given where they are in the situation.
Okay, so it's all about working together, I guess.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that we've always spoken about when people come to sit with us in TTiepod, talk about collaboration. And I believe it's the same thing when it comes to the energy market now, right? Because, okay, that shift, or different people shifting based on their capabilities and then supporting each other in their regions and also supporting the world.
Yes.
And I like your optimistic view of setting policies in that way that will make sense for those countries, and then see how they can work hand in hand with Europe. You know, last year we had the EU Africa Summit, and unfortunately I didn't participate in that. Maybe this year I will. But I think these are the type of conversations that need to be taken to that type of place and say, listen, okay, the EU has its policies, but also here in Angola, in SADC, so that's Southern African nations, in West Africa and East Africa nations, you know, these are the policies that I think will make sense for us. And then find a way to meet halfway. I think that's probably the best way to target or even attack these issues when it comes to reducing our greenhouse emissions.
You said it better than me. Thank you.
Kenny, thank you so much for coming out.
It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you for the time.
And I hope we'll have you back on here to speak a bit more and see if we can get somebody from Angola, either government or a specialist, to sit with us to actually have a three-way conversation while I can be the middleman and give my own point of view on it.
I would really enjoy that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. To our audience out there, 2026, I said, is here. We're having conversations. We've sat down with a specialist, economist, if I say that right. You know me in words, it's really bad. But, you know, a specialist come here to give us a bit of insight when it comes to biofuel. And if you do want to hear a bit more information, actually, before I close off, your paper, where can they find your paper? Is it published already?
It's in the process of being published. I will let the podcast, I will send you a note when it gets published.
Okay, so when it gets published, guys, we will publish it out there. And I'm sure as well, I don't know if you want to know more information about the farm that the work has been going on. Can we say the name of the farm? So I'm not going to say the name of the farm, but keep an eye out, because I'm sure once the paper comes out that Kenny has promised to share with us, we will let you know, and we'll also let you know the farm, so that maybe if you're also interested in doing such projects and being involved in biofuels, you can reach out to this farm, to this young gentleman that is looking at me from over there, and get advice from him on his experience with biofuels in Angola. So till next time, I am your host, KD, and I've been here with my guest,
Kenneth Grant.
Thank you very much. Till next time, cheers.
Indian Cajun.
Should have told me that before I would have said that.
That's right.
Thanks so much.
You should have gone with Kevin Durant. I would have gone with Kevin Durant.